"I'll make this easy on you," said a graying man as I regained my vision. As everything around me went from a milky white to a cream green, I tried to get my bearings. This definitely was not an ordinary hospital wing. And this definitely wasn't an ordinary doctor. The faint smell of gunpowder lingered in the room. "You've been out for quite some time," he continued. "Do you remember anything? Anything at all?" I shook my head slowly, as to not get dizzy. It felt like any sharp movements on my end might very well be my end, so I tried remaining as still as possible in the hard bed beneath me. No good. No good at all. The graying man adjusted his square glasses and sighed deeply, walking out of my sight. "You're not ready," said the man from behind my head. "I'm sorry to do this, but it's just for a few more minutes." A sharp pain on the left side of my head flushed my vision back to whiteness. "Let's try this," he whispered, and I jolted. With a loud thud, I impacted a wooden floor. No more gunpowder. I did, however, sense the smell of mild honey. Despite the sudden shift in everything around me, I couldn't shake the feeling of normality. This had all happened before. I heaved myself up from the floor and glanced at my surroundings. Dark plaster walls, a wide open white door, a painting, a portrait of a sailor by the looks of it, a small bed with a small frame, an empty bookcase, a large computer on a disproportionately tiny desk. This was my home. With my regained sense of awareness, I stood up and peeked outside the door, being met with a dirty kitchen. Dishes piled high and unattended to. Next to it, an empty cardboard box that once probably held a very delicious pizza. It wasn't too interesting, so I turned my interest to the already turned-on computer. Connected to it was an old CRT monitor. So old, in fact, I could swear I heard the sound of those cathode tubes working to stay alive. On it was a static news feed. A pretty anchorwoman was frozen on the screen, an unusually bright light coming off of her right side. The text beneath her was an alarming shade of red. What it said felt even more alarming. "Alert. Seek immediate shelter. Impact imminent." Impact? It was now I realized the sunshine outside my window was just as unusual. And so I slowly approached the glass panes. While at first all I could make out was the whiteness glowing brightly and sharply into my retinas, after a while of squinting, my eyes adjusted. I found I was very high up, and the view was wide and horrifying. Outside the window was no sunshine, but something much hotter and much more immediate. A vast explosion in the distance, decorating the skies so far up I couldn't tell where it actually ended. Trailing off in multiple directions, rolling its way across the city beneath, hungry flames loudly chewing up the neighborhoods of quiet families. Office districts toppled and crumbling, a shopping mall lifted from its roots, breaking into millions of pieces. The people all flung into the air, smashed up and blown apart by the sheer force of the pressure they were subjected to. But it wasn't moving. In fact, it was just as frozen as the lady on the screen. Except as I turned to look at her again, she wasn't frozen anymore. She uttered a brief, horrifying screech before being torn asunder, the feed turning into static not a half second later. And just like that, an ear-piercing boom came from outside. I turned around, collapsing onto the floor as I met with the bright light coming closer. 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 I jolted. The pain in my neck was slowly subsiding. The smell of gunpowder was back. Brilliant. That should do it. A familiar voice whispered behind me. All right then. I felt just slightly reinvigorated since my previous brief visit to this place. Slowly, I brought myself up to a sitting position. My vision still slightly blurry, and oddly as if my eyes were now trying to adjust to the darkness of this environment. As dry as I felt in my mouth, I figured the best way to understand the gaps in my memory was just to ask. Do you remember anything now? Interrupted the gray man. I think so, I replied with a hoarse throat and coughed. What did you see? When was it? How do you feel? He was wide-eyed with curiosity at this point, notepad and pen at the ready. Not knowing what I was getting myself into, I tried once more. Where am I? Not too surprisingly, the man frowned quickly and put down his notepad. He rubbed his forehead and sighed. I'm not sure where to begin, he said quietly and looked back at me. But I should introduce myself, I suppose. I'm Dr. Egon Nar, and this is my research facility. He lifted his arm and waved it around the place. As I regained my spatial awareness, I noticed this wasn't a room or a hospital like I'd previously thought. Around me was an assortment of items and majestic machines I've never seen before in a large, hangar-like building. A humming sound could be heard echoing from some of the bigger machines. It was all very badly lit up, and right in the middle was us, where seemingly most of the light was focused. We're somewhere near what used to be called Little Rock, in what used to be Arkansas, he continued, his sentence sort of trailing off near the end. Used to be? I asked quietly but curiously. What do you mean? That's what I'm trying to figure out, he sighed. Dr. Knorr hopped off his chair next to me and walked up to a workbench at the end of the bed. I'd just noticed how short the man was, and with a chubbier build, his steps were more like waddling. He picked a fist-sized object from the bench and looked at it for a few seconds before coughing and huddling back towards the chair. He handed me the device, and it read a peculiar date. October 8th, 2027. I'm sorry to tell you this, he said, but you've been out for over 10 years. To be continued.